Okay, everybody, good morning. Good morning, good morning. Happy Tuesday. Hope you all are managing very well the start of the new year. Never a dull moment, it seems, in 2026 so far. Going to do a little bit more political stuff today, but also charts. Good morning, Felix. Good morning. Buenos dias. Obviously, great power politics is back, as if that was sort of ever in doubt what the U.S. was leading to. So let's actually see if they can afford it and how the printing press looks relative to the debt, which is an important component. All right, so here's 250 years, basically, of U.S. debt. You notice a peak here. This is exactly actually when the Vietnam War ended. And then it goes down, not necessarily because, in fact, not at all because the U.S. Had less of debt. It's just that the debt grew faster than the central bank was printing before. And they realized that when they went off of the gold standard, they could do that. People would still take the dollars. You'd run trade deficits, but people would take the dollars. So it was the birth of the deficits without the trade deficits with no tears era, which we're still in. We're still in this era, so it's important to understand when we talk about the dollar. All right, so again, the green line is just the holdings of the central bank relative to the debt. Okay, so this peak here of 18% and then going down is not because the central bank was in particular buying any less. It can zoom in, right? But you can see the debt starts to ramp up even as the Vietnam War ends. All right. Good morning, Bitcoin Polska. Good morning. So then we got to 80s, 90s. Communism is falling, thankfully, for Europe, Eastern Europe. Global financial crisis. Alan Greenspan manipulated a lot of interest rates here, but whatever it is, what it is, we got into QE 1, 2, 3. Silly season of the 2020s. And now where we are today. All right, so this is Powell. Somewhat courageously, some might say, in the face of political positions, reducing the size of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. All right? And you do that by having higher interest rates and letting the debt roll off the books. But the debt still grows. So it's becomes a question of a ratio, basically. And if you zoom in, right, this is as of December. My zoom button is actually annoying here. Hold on. Can I get that? Yeah, this you can maybe see a little bit better. We're just starting to go back up. All right. He signaled for it, and basically you can see there's just a little bit of an increase right here. And even on the percentage, you can see there's a little bit of an increase. Okay, so we were going down, and then December we started to go up, which was as advertised in the last Fed meetings. So with all the madness around the world and, U.S. going back to intervening in foreign affairs, kind of like, did they ever really leave? But going back in a different way than they have before, one might wonder, is it, can they afford it? We saw Bitcoin's price has been basically rising since the Maduro capture. And as I've been saying for a while, they actually, from the perspective of printing, they can. They can. Good morning, John. Good morning. So, the precedent during the crazy years was owning basically 30%, a little bit less, 28.3% of total debt. And so the Federal Reserve had a third, a little bit less than a third of the total debt of the United States. And it's interesting here, you notice after QE2, kind of after even QE1, but really after QE2 and then after QE3 was fully wound down just before the silly season. This level of about 15% seems to be a kind of an invisible floor. All right, and interestingly, that was the same level that they peaked at in the 70s. You know, don't know if we can read too much into it, but I do think the numbers in this chart tell us pretty clearly that they're going to turn it around, and they have plenty of room to do so. All right, so, you know, remember, this is a ratio, but still, if we just look at and think about how the United States grows its deficits or grows its both its deficits and its debt, debt being the accumulation of deficits, you know, these are now to the tune of trillions of dollars a year. All right, so it's really, you know, it doesn't matter Republican, Democrat, and even with the, you know, I've talked about many times the Clinton wonder years of the split House, Newt Gingrich Congress. Let's take off actually this really isn't shown here, but right, that sort of balancing of the budget happened really just right here. It's the Clinton heroic balancing of the budget. Doesn't really matter. They're going to keep going. The question is, how far can they go? And I would argue they can go quite a bit. And barring any major international or pandemic like event, they don't have to blow it out like they blew it out in these prior situations. Trump's been saying for years he wants low interest rates. He hates Powell. He wants to control the Fed. It's about the last government body that he doesn't sort of control at the moment. Powell's going to be leaving. He's going to get what he wants. So, again, I would argue that they have runway. I'm not saying I'm defending it at all, the situation, but it is what it is. It's important to understand when you think about what Bitcoin could do or will do. All right, so we'll go back to Bitcoin. Just getting back up to the median, right? As we talked about from Saturday, basically the price has been on the rise. And if you look at that hourly or 4-hour chart, you can see it was almost to the moment of capture. Bitcoin's price has been rising. Yes, thank you for this, Bitcoin Polska. I have heard that he's still, you know, can still be around. And I think people have been speculating that he would leave. Of course, I'm sure there are people speculating that he would stay as well, but regardless, this is not a quote normal time, right? So we have the good old power curve, the rainbow curve. I wanted to go back, by the way, to this period, which is basically the founding of the Republic. All right, so the first Bank of the United States, the second Bank of the United States, Jackson, the hero to many in the financial world, paid down the debt entirely. All right, but the United States was an extremely, extremely strong position, especially after uh, the European Wars of 1812 and the American Wars of 1812. Um, paying down their debt, basically controlling the hemisphere. And it was right about here where John Quincy Adams was writing the Monroe Doctrine. Different world. Debt being paid down and telling basically the European powers to stay out of the United States' hemisphere or time zone. Did they have time zones back then? So, totally different. By the way, for all the people that say like Ukraine should never be helped, I've said this many times as well. This 70, 80, 100 million in debt right here was Revolutionary War debt. The Spanish, the Dutch, the French all helped America. The French in particular basically helped America win at Yorktown. More French troops, boats, artillery, and casualties suffered at the Battle of Yorktown was the decisive battle that ended the American Revolution. For those that like to say Ukraine should just fight their own war, which they are doing, and has actually never asked for troops of any kind, this is things that just get my goat a little bit. Anyway, uh, not sure what else we can really glean from this history, but you know, Native Americans had a hard time here with Andrew Jackson, so it's hard to know about all the angels we can find in these situations. But in any event, here we are. I think they're going to have plenty of room to increase the debt and to have the Federal Reserve increase their portion of the debt. And I also don't think that Trump's going to go into, full on regime change mode like, Bush did in Iraq and Afghanistan. But he certainly, I think he has the budget to do it. Not as say as normal as these times, right? Iraq started here. But they have room. Still an open question for me on where we're going here. If this is just hovering around the power curve now for forever until we have some, just crazy market moves, or if we're still on the 4-year cycle. I don't want to call it yet. What do you guys think? You think it was a cycle? Because the cycle would assume that we had, big ups and big downs. And we just didn't have that off of these big down periods. We just didn't have the big ups. We did have some sort of early moves compared to prior cycles, but we just never had the explosive top. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's totally possible. If you take out the extremes, this is where we are, just like you said. And going down to 64, totally possible. But even as that as time dilates, that doesn't even look so crazy. We've been at, 80 plenty of times here and here. Not quite. Intraday, I think we went down to like 82, didn't we? Don't really pick it up. I think we went down to like 82, 83. So all of that is totally, totally possible for the next 2 to 3 years. And if that happens, then I guess, cycles are over. There's just no denying it at that point. A lot of chatter online. Just, people that don't know about the power curve or don't talk about it, you could just look at this and say, well, this looks like a top, right? It might not be as extreme as these tops, but this is a top and we're going back down to some level based on some random Fibonacci or whatever. Maybe. No one says the power curve has to be sort of gospel as far as tops and bottoms. Would be disappointing. But if we go back to the 10th on the multiple basis, which is a 70% discount, you know, 60K, which would line up 50, 60K, which would line up exactly with the prior cycles where you reset at basically the cycle before that's high. Okay, so we reset at 2017 high all the way here in 2022. And in 2018, we reset at 2013's high. Sorry. Actually, we didn't go as low as that, which was 1200. In any event, I just don't know. Good morning, MP. Totally possible. Totally possible. So you think we're going back down to these levels? Like 60K by the end of the year? Or we're just cycle dead as in we're just hanging around the power curve? Or what does it mean in your opinion, cycle dead? I have a lot of fun stuff coming this year. As I said, working on getting you guys access to some of this charts. It's just a lot of thinking on my side about trying to make this thing scalable and do all the money supply stuff that I want to do. Yeah, I mean, liquidity is absolutely a driver now, especially for a main, top asset. But we're going to have to see how some of these work out. Let me pull up a couple more. As you guys know, I still have some skeptical takes on, even though I've been studying the money supply for a long time, people that are keen to say that it's all about like the M2 money supply when that doesn't even include any institutional money. It just makes me a little bit more skeptical. All right, is this going to work? One second. So just as far as the Fed is concerned, bringing in the global money supply changes it. But so here's just the Fed. All right. You see how small Bitcoin is relative to the Fed all the way up until 2020. And not quite large. I mean, compared to just one central bank, and indeed the main central bank. Notice, by the way, you can see it better on this picture, the little kink up in money printing, also in government debt. So other than saying there's a positive relationship, a positive correlation, one goes up, the other goes up, which I think you can say about a lot of stuff, right? Like not just debt. I think you can say that about GDP growth, production, PMI stuff, inflation rates. Other than just saying that there's a positive correlation, again, I wonder how accurate. Like, okay, so for example, this one, right? Bitcoin was going up in 2017, and the Fed balance sheet was going down. It was flat and going down. Now I know here it lined up pretty perfectly. Okay. But then look at here. I mean, the centrally managed balance sheet of the Federal Reserve has been going down and Bitcoin's been going up. So it's not like, it's just not one-to-one is my concern with this idea about liquidity or knowing exactly when it's going to happen. It's a positive relationship. It's absolutely when one goes up, eventually the other's going to go up. I just wonder if it's, again, these are these simple ideas of just dividing Bitcoin by M2 or something, which again is the wrong. If you're going to divide it by anything, it would be the central bank balance sheet. It would be this. Or the monetary base, which is a subset of this, but mostly this. Whoops. This is also interesting to look at, just the regression of the ratio just for the Fed. Get to 100% of the Fed's balance sheet by the end of the decade. Absolutely possible. An incredible accomplishment for Satoshi in any event. And for all of us, right? Sorry, I've been missing a bunch of comments. The small pump 4 years ago, what are you referring to? I mean, this was a big pump. These are, you're looking at market caps here, but this was the two double tops of, into 60K, 60, 70K, depending on your market. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, that's interesting. Keep in mind, another interesting thing about this is, one is exponential and one is power. So you see it right here. It's a wacky exponential, right? You can go back to the other charts I've shown you where you show the degrees of the slope. But Bitcoin's still growing in this more sustainable way, whereas the Federal Reserve can do wacky stuff. But it's still, 6, 7, 8% per year. Bitcoin's growing at 40% per year. You can see the difference. But I agree. I mean, 50, 60K, we could go there. Right, but this was this is now 5 years ago. It's outside of the 4-year time frame. And if you look at the other metrics, whether it's the power curve or my PSR ratio or plenty of other things, MVRV, this is most likely the technical top was here. And this was the scam top, which was here. For 2022. Yeah, I guess I should just go back to the price so we can look at it together. Yeah, so like here, coming down from the top, and this is where you just got to look at other indicators because yeah, you could say it's over when you start going out of the 9 into the 8 into the 7. This is where I get tentative to call it. I mean, was this a 4-year cycle top? It just doesn't work with our power curve metrics. Because remember, this curve, all of these lines are a derivation of this curve. But if this curve just sort of, it's not magic, right? It is good relationship, positive relationship. But if the market doesn't sort of see it that way in the short term, and, again, we were way fast here with the ETFs, way faster than the prior cycle. Although we did have actually, yeah, I was going to say this, but this was even before. The 2019 was just in the middle of the last one because of, deep curve there. Really, we're just way faster, way slower here to boom, right? Just way slower. Just looking at it directionally. So my tune last year was, okay, if we don't hit the 9, then definitely the cycles are over. But I'm now wondering, if the cycles are over. The cycles are not over, but we just didn't get as high as, our peak here was the 7, and that's just it. That's all it is. And we're still going to go down to a 10. 10th percentile. That would be rough. And that would be, you know, 50, 60K by some point mid-year this year. What do you guys think? To me, this is like totally possible. The only thing that says we don't do that to me is the institutional appetite and the fact that we didn't blow off above the 8 and the 9 in the prior cycle. Well, as I started, I think they're gonna, yeah, this could boost it as well. I mean, they have the room now. Now that they're back down to this 15% level only, even though the debt itself is huge, right? Huge. Going on 40 trillion seems like a remarkable number. It was 10 trillion on the eve of the financial crisis, during the financial crisis. 4x in 18 years. Yeah. Well, I wanted to show this as well because I've talked about this a lot. If you got, in light of what I talked about yesterday with the maps and the way that the world order that's clearly over now with the direct capturing of a president in another country. Um, Bitcoin, this could be the start of Bitcoin's like genuine rise. Um, One of the good books, in my opinion, that shows why the end of the international gold standard, really the nail in the coffin, was not what Roosevelt did, even though, yes, he was just as bad as everybody else as far as manipulating the currency. It was when European gold actually had to go on the run. And it's just an excellent book, written already 10 years ago now. One of my favorites, if you're into money and debt and central banking and finance. It's really detailed on each invasion uh, that the Nazis did and how they were chasing gold. The most interesting ones are the Norwegian gold and the Polish gold. Um, so I would highly, highly recommend this book if you guys have not read it. Again, just piggybacking on what I talked about yesterday. Nazis invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, Soviets on September 17th, and in that month, they got their gold out of Poland through all different central bank branches on trains. They went to Romania, they went to the Black Sea. They chartered an oil ship, uh, which was, I think it was a British run ship, but it was from Mobil, Exxon Mobil. Got it down to Istanbul, which you don't see on the map, and then the Turks were neutral basically. It was a dicey situation, and they got it on a train all the way to Lebanon, and then a French ship took it all over here, and then the French got invaded. So it's a wild story about protecting sort of a nation's wealth, and I don't think, regardless of what's happening with gold, again, I've talked about it a lot. Central banks over the last 20 years have bought 0.5% per year increase in actual bullion. So try to reconcile that with the 40% CAGR we've had over the last 2 years in price. This could be, who knows, maybe we'll look back at this little bump as Bitcoin's moment where it, just gets into totally different levels. Now we start to get up to, It only takes, first of all, as you saw here, it's only going to take 5 more years to reach U.S. central bank levels. And this is not all of the money supply. Then we got to go up to about, it's going to be like 40 trillion at the time globally, based on projections. It's 25 trillion now, 26. Um, but yeah, I mean, look at the curve by 20. When is it? Yeah, it hits 200,000 in 2027 June. So just hard to ignore Bitcoin at that point when you're constantly at, low 6-digit figures. It's wild to think about, but it's coming. It's coming. This is not going to work anymore, no matter what the Chinese are saying, no matter what the Russians are saying. I'm sure you guys saw that report how the Russians took Venezuela's gold a few years ago as a part of their peace deal. By the way, see how good it is to do peace deals with the Russians? They can't even, shoot one air defense ordnance. I understand. I understand. Morning, Kurt. Yeah, really, really good book. The guy's like was like a wine journalist or something. Lived in France for a long time, as far as I understand, if I recall. Um, yeah, 65K support. Agree. 50-60 is super solid, especially because of prior cycles. Just want to show a couple more things. Talked about this yesterday. Just some things that you guys might not see on your feed. So this Vicegrad, which again is a fantastic channel, Polish based, they showed a Venezuelan refugee who was actually persecuted by Maduro, calling out the participants of the pro Maduro protests in Switzerland. All right, in Switzerland, you're wondering what's going on here. Why would there be pro Maduro protesters? He's literally asking them in Spanish. It's like, you from Venezuela? You from Venezuela? Couldn't find one. This is 100% clear to me. There's no. This is basically just standard stuff. So I would recommend checking that one out. Let me show you. Let's see. This one. So these are such ridiculous fascist claims. It's hard to know where to begin. If you guys didn't see this, but first, Denmark has had these arguments with Greenlanders for years about their own independence, but it's hard to imagine a more obtuse statement than saying that Denmark doesn't have any territorial claim to Greenland. And as John Bolton said, if they actually pursue this, then it's the end of NATO for sure. This was quite funny. Not that the U.S. can't purchase a lot, but we in the Baltics have 50% of U.S. icebreaker, ice capable capacity. So everybody needs to think about how to navigate there, even if the ice caps melt. A lot of people say Tucker's paid by Qatar. He very well could be. I know for sure his father's been paid by Orban in Hungary. Just another one here. Again, I'm super happy for the Venezuelan people. We're going to have to see how this actually works out for them. But this is sort of the crazy wing. I have to show this just again. This guy's such a loser. These guys are on the way out of power for sure in April. It's probably the biggest election that's going to happen in Europe for a while. But this one, I mean, it's absolutely going to be super important if they can bring democracy back to Hungary, the poorest country in Europe. And these guys just continue to flex in a literally embarrassing way. This guy, I showed clips of him meeting with Maduro a couple years ago. They're just as corrupt as Russia. They've completely rigged. Like basically, this plan was the Heritage 2025 document. They've completely rigged the judicial system, the media, all of that stuff is modeled off what Hungary did. So we're going to see. We're going to see if their opposition actually can do anything in April. They are way ahead in the polls. This is just more hilarious stuff to me. Rubio with his 10 jobs is going to take on more. You saw the one about the Prime Minister of Venezuela, Cuba, and the Shah of Iran. Never know. Might happen. Also very important questions for people to ask right now. Okay? Especially since Venezuelan patriots, so to speak, were supplied with Russian air defenses. Just ask the question, why did they fall within hours, but Ukraine did not? All right, one was clearly by the way, a lot of people are asking questions like, again, I'm not defending the Trump regime, as most of you guys know that I tend not to do, but if you had to put a scale on what Russia has done to Ukraine, the United States has done to Venezuela, and what the United States could do to Greenland, I would say the Venezuelan move is much, much less bad. Again, there is no international law, right? So it's like we talk about international law, but I heard this on actually one of the Ukraine, the latest pods as well, this idea. But if you had to rank them, and I think all you can do is basically rank them because the UN is going to be arguing over all this stuff. There's a big difference between, say, invading a country to take out a dictator, like what the U.S. did in Iraq, which the U.S. MI5, MI6 officers said on the Rest is Politics podcast a couple years ago that what the Americans did was shameful, trying to tie Iraq to 9/11. So there's that view, right? But then there's the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Obviously just as bad, if not worse, because Ukraine was a democracy, not being liberated from anybody. In fact, being firebombed. And then there's, say, what the United States could do to Greenland, what they might try to do to Greenland. I would say that's very close, if not the same, all right, to a NATO ally. And then there's what happened with Maduro in Venezuela. It's just a different situation, much less absolutely repressive regime. And it's clear that if you see things like this, 100%, like as I said, 99%, these people are paid. When you see rallies like this, nobody's from Venezuela. These masked thugs come up to him at the end trying to push him. These people are paid probably by Russia, just like they do with the troll farms in India, Pakistan, and Russia itself. So it's a brave new world. I mean, you just have to realize this is what it is. You can't put your head in the sand or say that, if we go back and sort of think about local politics, these people are just going to go away. They're going to take power as much as they can. But again, having said all that, you see what happens if you choose your ally based on dictatorship, autocracy. Usually, you get a situation. Oh, where'd it go again? I was going to try to pull it up. You get the Borscht situation where they all end up in Moscow. We just looked at it yesterday and I can't find it now. But basically, Assad, Yanukovych. Here it is. Finally got it. This is the situation that you get, basically, if you're going for the dictatorship side. We're going to see about Orban. He is as corrupt as they get in Europe. Bringing it back to Ukraine a little bit more, besides all these losers in Hungary. This is an interesting story that I saw. Okay, so this is one of the things. The Russians, they just cannot get it together, even with their dissidents. With their anti-Kremlin, anti-Putin leadership. There's some leaked texts here from this guy. He actually lives in Lithuania. He was attacked in Lithuania by Russia. They tried to bring him back to Belarus. But basically, he said, and this is a complicated story. Okay, so I talked about this before. This guy, he's a anti-Kremlin. He's fighting in Ukraine for the Ukrainians. His name is Kaputin. It's kind of funny. Interesting name, fighting against Putin. He's for sure himself kind of a neo-Nazi. He's a controversial guy. I'm not saying, whatever. But they faked his death, and they ended up taking $500,000 of Russian money for the Ukrainian cause. And then this guy is some leaked text talking about how he thought that this was a great thing, that this guy actually died, and then he wanted Budanov in jail and everybody else, of course. And Budanov is now, he's the head of Ukrainian intelligence services. This guy is super smart. Now he's on Zelensky's chief of staff. These guys are just not giving up. This is, again, where if you're sitting in America, you're thinking that Central Intelligence Agency is just too crazy. It doesn't have, the government doesn't have control of it or whatever. Look at Russia first. Look at Russia. Look at the executions that they carry out. There's no other way other than to arm yourself against this type of very bad behavior. But anyway, it's just to show you that Russian opposition just cannot sort of stay united. They can't get it together. They end up saying things that is basically anti-Ukrainian, and you can find plenty of it online. Another example, probably the best candidate to beat Putin was murdered in 2015, about 100 meters away from the Kremlin. Boris Nemtsov. I wouldn't go as far as this. This is quite a Ukrainian aimed post, because someone like here, Vladimir Karamurza, I think I actually respect him a lot. He just got out of jail, out of the gulag. Here's Navalny's wife. This is the guy I was just talking about, Volkov. But these guys, they just can't get it together. They can't actually unite abroad and be against Putin. you always see more things of these guys just fighting amongst themselves than just saying it clearly. Ukraine needs to win. Putin needs to lose. It's disheartening to see. Well, everything is a psyop if you're Russian. That's for sure. But look, there is. I'll say it 1,000 times. There's a difference between a late night talk show in the United States, as much as Trump hates them and he wants to silence them. Someone like Jimmy Kimmel, who was almost off the air in September. There's a difference between him and Yvonne Organt, who was the last late night talk show in Russia, who never really said anything controversial, even though he's kind of sometimes joking about the Kremlin. And he's now in exile in Israel. And there is no, is no way to speak any sort of truth to power in Russia. So there's a clear line there. And I would say we can't lose that line in the free world. And something like this would be losing, something like this would be losing that line. Right? Look, the Greenlanders themselves want independence. They argue with Denmark all the time. But just saying that, this sort of fascist stuff that, borders don't mean anything, territorial claims don't mean anything, that does become into the PSYOP sort of post-truth territory. And I think we should condemn it. Back to this. Totally possible again. You guys think it's more likely? We only spent a month below this line. Well, a little bit more than a month. 2 months. 2 full months of mega buying ops. And that happened, if the 4-year cycle is intact, if everything happens the way it did before, then that's right here. Totally possible. But then I would ask you, if it does happen, then I would say the 4-year cycle is still intact. It's just sort of even less exciting than we thought it was. But it's still intact. Anyway, those are the highlights I had today, guys. Anybody want to see any other charts? We know the money printing is coming this year for the US. And that seems like it will be a tailwind for Bitcoin, but we're just going to have to see. The peak in the Fed's balance sheet was here. Let's go on linear here. Peak in the Fed's balance sheet was here. This correlated perfectly. A drop and a drop, but then this did not correlate at all. So I have a hard time. I don't know. I have a hard time gaming this one out because right now we're going, you see it right here. We're going up. Money printing is here. And there's plenty of money to do it, so to speak. I don't, no one knows for sure if the game would ever be fully up and we go into some crack up boom, but the Fed could theoretically double their balance sheet and still be below the levels that they ever were at their peak of owning US debt, theoretically. So what happens if Trump jumps the gun and we are now in a mega printing moment here? Does Bitcoin still go down into the end of the year? Or does it go back up? Oh, sorry. I took my picture off. I do sometimes for the Twitter, the tweets when I show them, but anyway. Never financial advice, but probably DCAing at these levels is still pretty decent, I would say. Could get much better. You know, but half the time. This is the half point. This is the median. And this is a very not courageous call, but I would say if we go to here by the year end, then I will for sure be telling everybody that the cycles are not over, as crazy as it seems. Because if we retest, then we've retested. But if we don't, if we stay around, you know, these levels, then the cycles are over. I just don't know the timeline, right? I don't know the confirmation unless we wait like a year. Just come back in January 2027 and we'll know for sure. That's where I'm going to leave it today, guys. If we stay in these bands for a year, cycles are over. If we don't, if we drop down here, cycles are not over. That's what I think. Yeah. Also, printing. Well, I have a chart for this actually. I'm not sure it's fully updated, but I can show you. I won't leave it just now. Let's see if I can find you this. Okay, so this one might be interesting for you. Thanks, guys. I'll do one more here because this is a good question that Coop just brought up. This is a bit hard to read. And this is obviously erratic, but so the debt's here. But the fiscal side, I know debt is fiscal, but the actual month in, month out is here. And so this is cents on the dollar of tax income. So what this means is typically the government takes in $1, spends $1, and this is the deficit on top of that. It's kind of weird. It's a positive number, but that's just how I'm showing it. When they run a surplus, it's negative. They save 3 cents on the dollar. But most of the time, interesting here actually after World War I, most of the time, especially big deficits in rough times, most of the time they are running deficits, okay? And most of the time, it's like I think the average is like 25 cents. If you just do straight line average, 25 cents on the dollar deficit. So they take in $1 in taxes, spend $1 in taxes, and then 25 cents on top deficit. You can measure interest here. Now this is part of the original $1.45. So at the so this is not a cumulative thing. It's very constant, right? So this is the actual interest payments. You see they were quite low here and now raising with the higher interest rates, but so the total spending on the dollar is right now $1.45. On $1 taxes received, they spend $1.45. 24 cents of that $1.45 is in interest. And it's high, but it's not like these levels high. Great Depression levels high. Or even in the 90s here was pretty high. Anyway, it is, the military is about the same. So we are spending 24 cents on the dollar in interest and also in the military. That's not a good thing. But anyway, we can measure the printing as well. So this is kind of interesting. So the printing can go up or go down. All right, obviously, when the balance sheet declines of the Federal Reserve, it goes down, just like here, right? Back to here. This is this moment. Anyway, so this black line, it shows us how much of the deficit basically is printed. And this is where I'm saying they got a lot of room. This was, when this number goes negative, they're taking down the Federal Reserve's number. So they got a lot of room here. By the way, historically, it was just smaller numbers. I think even, almost all the time, really. This was a big print. 56 cents on the dollar was printed here in the 30s. But other than that, this is why they all thought that like printing money was a science experiment. You just have to print a little bit of money and a lot can happen, right? Very, very small activity as far as what the actual printing press changed versus the deficit month in, month out. But here, obviously, it gets crazy. Super crazy. And there's room to print. This is my point of showing this. There's room to print. And so they're probably going to do it. All right, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you. Thank you, Kurt. Yeah, I think that's probably true too. Thank you so much. Take care, guys. We will talk to you tomorrow. Have a good day. They will print.